Hi, my name's Drew, and I'd like to start off by thanking you for taking the time to check out my board game, Armistice. This game still is early in its development, so please send any feedback or recommendations to 4085gamery@gmail.com. This game is designed for 2 to 6 players. The game time is estimated to be about 30 minutes per player, and the complexity is around 4 out of 5. Following a war known as the Collapse, the world has descended into instability. As the leader of a nation in this world, you seek to unite the people under your banner by showing them that you have the power to protect them and the resources to provide for them. This is a game played in clockwise turns, where a turn consists of playing and resolving one strategy card from your hand. To set up the game, you will first need to determine the turn order. For my demonstration, I'll be using the green player and the blue player, with the green player going first. Turns will be made in clockwise order, and our blue player will be the last player. We will give this insider trading token to the last player, and we'll cover this token in more detail later on in the video. Once the turn order is set, the next step will be to select factions. This is done in reverse turn order, starting with the last player. So for our demonstration, the blue player will go ahead and pick a faction, followed by the first player selecting a faction. Inside of their faction box, each player will find a two-sided leader card, an officer deck, and a tile for their capital territory, along with any other faction-specific components. Each player will also start the game with a color-specific resource tracker board, a deck of strategy cards, color-specific units, and 3 credits. Now that the turn order is set and each player selected a faction, it's time to build the map. First, we'll deal 3 region tiles to each player. Then players will proceed in turn order to place 1 region tile at a time, with the following rules. Each tile placed must either be adjacent to the Zion tile, or the tile must be adjacent to 2 previously placed tiles. For example, this would be a valid placement because the new tile is adjacent to these 2 previously placed tiles, whereas placing the tile here would not be a valid placement because this is only adjacent to 1 other tile. This would be an example of another invalid tile placement, as placing this tile here would create a hole in the map. First-time players can have a tendency to put all the land around the middle of the map and end up with ocean around a lot of the edges of the map, but it's recommended if you're a first-time player that you try and keep a lot of land around the edges of the map so you can have more opportunities for growth from your capital at the start of the game. Once all the region tiles have been placed and the map has been built, you'll need to add an Explore token to every territory and a Rebel Force to every territory with this red Rebel Force icon. You can add an Explore token by pressing 3 on the number pad, and you can add a Rebel Force by pressing 7 on the number pad. Next, each player will place their capital in turn order. In our example, we'll start with the green player, and when placing a capital, the capital cannot be adjacent to the Zion territory or adjacent to another player's capital, and it also cannot be adjacent to a territory that's already adjacent to another player's capital. For example, the green player could place their capital here, and then the blue player, when placing their capital, could not place their capital either here, as this would be adjacent to another player's capital. And they also could not play their territory here because this would be adjacent to Devonshire, and the Devonshire territory is already adjacent to the green player's capital. The blue player could place their capital down here. Once a player has placed their capital tile, they'll fill their capital territory with one of each type of factory, so a materials factory, a fuel factory, and a food factory, 1 colony, 1 standard base, and 1 infantry unit. Now that the map's complete, each player will need to select their leader. Each faction box comes with a leader card that is two-sided. You can flip this card back and forth with the F key, and each player will place face up the leader that they'd like to play as for the game. When you first load the game in Tabletop Simulator, all the decks will be shuffled for you, but you will need to build the R&D row by drawing the first 5 cards from the R&D deck and placing them into these 5 slots here. We'll go over the specifics of the R&D cards later on in the video. The next step in the setup will be to draw 2 of these ambition cards. These are going to be positive score modifiers that you're going to keep secret until the end of the game. In this example, we have the Reign ambition, which would double the victory points from each of your completed control missions. Also the Conqueror ambition, which would double your battle victory score. We'll go ahead and select the Conqueror. So at the end of the game, any victory points scored for these battle victories is going to be doubled. We'll go ahead and flip that over and we'll keep it a secret until the end of game scoring. The next thing you'll do is draw 2 of these weaknesses. The 2 you draw are not going to be the 2 you pick from. You'll actually look at these and pass 1 of these to each of your neighbors. So in a 3-player game, I would pass 1 to the red player and 1 to the blue player of my choice. But in a 2-player game, you'll go ahead and look at each of them and then pass them both to your neighbor. So I have the Impulsive. If you do not have the most fuel factories, you lose points. And Glutton says if you don't have the most food factories, you lose points. I'll go ahead and take these 2 and I'll pass them to the blue player, who will decide which one to keep and which one to discard. In the meantime, the blue player will have passed 2 weaknesses to us. We can look at each of these and decide which one we want to keep. These are going to be a secret score reducing modifier. So we can either be envious. If we don't have the most materials factories, we lose 5 points. If we're tied for the most, we lose 3. Or we can get the loner. Lose 3 victory points for every officer slot that does not have an active officer. We'll go ahead and pick the loner weakness. Just stay focused on getting all of our officers. Next, each player will be dealt 3 mission cards. The mission cards are these purple-backed cards. And each player will be able to keep 2 and will discard 1 of these mission cards. We'll cover the mission cards in more detail later, but you can quickly discard a card by pressing 9 on the number pad. The final step in the setup will be to roll the 3 commodity dice here. They can be rolled using the R key. The 3 commodity dice represent the prices of food with the yellow die, materials with the red die, and fuel with the blue die. In Armistice, players will try and gain the most influence over the world by accumulating the most victory points. So at the end of the game, the player with the most victory points will win, with ties going to the player that's later in turn order. The game is played in continuous clockwise turns until one of the game's endgame conditions is met. A player takes a turn by playing and resolving one of their strategy cards from their hand. The game ends and scoring begins whenever any one player has completed at least one of the following. They've either scored 5 missions, they've controlled Zion for 11 turns, they've won 6 battles, or they've placed all 7 of their colonies. At this point in the video, I'll review the 7 strategy cards and their associated components. The strategy cards are these 7 blue cards that can be found in each player's area. You'll go ahead and draw these into your hand. And to play a strategy card, you'll move it from your hand into this discard symbol on your resource tracker. When a card is played, it should update in the side information screen to let other players know what your last played card was. The first strategy card we'll take a look at is the Recruitment card. The Recruitment card allows you to produce more units using materials. Materials are the red commodity. There are 3 types of units: land units, sea units, and air units. And each type of unit has the following statistics. The surface attack in red tells you how many dice and what color dice this unit can roll an attack against surface units. The air attack is how many and what color dice they can roll an attack against air units. Defense is how many hits this unit can take before it's destroyed. Move is the number of adjacent territories the unit can move through when they're activated to move. And capacity is the number of infantry units that this unit can carry. The last number we'll look at is the cost on the right. This is the number of materials it takes to build one of these units. Players gain commodities, the red materials, the blue fuel, and yellow food by producing them with their factories or by purchasing them from the market. Looking at my resource tracker, I can see I only have one materials factory active on the board, meaning I only gain one material from my factories. I can buy additional material from the market to help me produce more units. The red four-sided dice tells me the current cost of one material from the market is 2. You purchase commodities with a combination of either spending credits or taking out bonds. With a current material price of 2, we'll start spending some credits to get additional materials. So by spending these first 2 credits, we get one more material to spend on units. Next, we'll look into taking out bonds. When you take out bonds, you can take them out until your total amount of bonds is equal to your total colonized population. Right now, the green player only has their starting territory colonized with a population of 3, which means they can only take out bonds until their total bonds goes up to 3. They couldn't go past that to 4 bonds at this point. So we'll go ahead and we'll take out 3 bonds. So that means these first 2 would give us an additional materials factory. And then with this third bond and spending this last credit, that would give us one more materials factory. So by spending 3 credits and taking out 3 bonds, that's a total of 6 credits in value, which means 3 additional materials, plus the one we created with our materials factory, means we have 4 materials to spend on units. Looking at the unit options, one option would be to build a tank with the cost of 4. Instead, we'll build 1 truck and 2 infantry. And then any units produced must be placed in a territory that contains a base or an advanced base unless a game effect says otherwise. So the green player can only place these produced units here in the capital with a standard base. Players can clear bonds on their turn by paying an equal value of credits to the supply. For example, a player could return 1 credit to the supply and then clear 1 bond. Bonds can be a great way to get your faction going early, but you will want to be careful because any bonds you have at the end of the game will count as -1 victory point. The next card we'll look at is the Mobilize card. The Mobilize card allows you to move 1 unit for every fuel commodity you spend. Like materials, fuel is made in your blue factories, and additional fuel can be bought from the market. Each unit can only move or be carried by another unit once per strategy card. For example, the green player has 1 fuel from the fuel factory in their capital territory, and they can use that fuel to move 1 unit. The green player could use their fuel to move their truck. Looking at the truck statistics, we could see that the truck can move a distance of 2 territories, and the capacity of 2 means that the truck could carry up to 2 infantry. So looking at the map, our green player will spend 1 fuel to move their truck while carrying the 2 infantry units. And when moving, land units are going to have to move through continuous stretches of land. So first movement, since the truck can move 2 spaces, will be here into the Devonshire territory. And while moving, a unit can drop off and pick up other units as long as it has capacity. So our truck will go ahead and leave 1 infantry here in Devonshire, and we'll use its second movement, because again the truck has a move stat of 2, to move through this continuous stretch of land into the territory with the rebel force named Roland. This is going to create an opportunity for a battle. Moving into the Devonshire territory and leaving a land unit behind will create an opportunity for exploration. Before we move on with the battle and exploration, here are some additional movement rules and examples. Unless a game effect says otherwise, land units can only move across continuous stretches of land, and sea units can only move across continuous stretches of sea. So if we were to look at these purple units, we see that the truck can only move into this territory containing the rebel force because this is the only continuous stretch of land available. Similarly, the battleship would not be able to travel into this territory in one movement because the entire border between the two territories is land. This battleship could, however, move into this sea territory. Unless a game effect says otherwise, land units cannot move into mountain territories. For example, this land unit cannot move into this mountain territory that's symbolized with a gray color in this mountain symbol. As another example, this transport plane in Porto del Sol could move into Lido, and because it has capacity, could pick up this infantry unit along its path and then move into a mountain territory because it's an air unit. Because land units can't move into mountain territories and the red player doesn't have any abilities to say otherwise, the infantry unit would remain in the transport plane and would not be on the ground to explore the region. The transport plane could carry the infantry unit into Golden Leaf, but that infantry unit would not be able to move again during that strategy card, because each unit can only move or be carried once per strategy card. Some game effects can affect capacity. For example, the carrier unit can carry any land or air unit, not just infantry. Units have to stop whenever they enter a territory that contains an opponent that can attack them. For example, this fighter plane could fly over the territory containing the Wolf of the West because the Wolf of the West does not have the ability to attack air units. Whereas if this fighter were to enter the territory containing Hong, it would have to stop because this rebel force has the ability to attack air units. This would trigger a battle. When movement is complete, any battles that are triggered need to be resolved. If there are multiple battles to resolve, the active player selects the order. So going back to our example, we'll need to resolve this battle the green player has triggered against this rebel force. The battle round is conducted in a series of steps. Step 1 allows air units to roll attacks against other air units. In step 2, any surviving air units will roll surface attacks. In step 3, any surviving surface units roll attacks against other surface units. And in step 4, any surviving surface units are able to roll attacks against opponents' air units. At the end of the 4 steps, if a player has no surface units remaining, they lose the battle. In the event that neither force has any surface units remaining, the defending player wins the battle. If both players still have surface units remaining, first the attacker and then the defender get to decide if they'd like to retreat. If neither player has retreated and there hasn't been a victory, you would repeat another battle round. If the attacker wins the battle in a territory that contains the defender's colony, base, or any factories, the colony, base, and factories are returned to the defending player's resource tracker. Step 1 and Step 2 of the battle round involve air units rolling attacks. Because there are no air units in this combat, we'll go straight to Step 3, where surface units will roll attacks against other surface units. Looking at the ground attack statistic, you can know what color and how many dice each unit will roll in an attack against other surface units. On the green attacker side, we can see both the infantry and truck will roll 1 white dice, which you can get by pressing 4 on the number pad. And looking at our rebel force, we can see that they would also roll 1 white dice as a surface attack. Each battle dice has 3 possible outcomes. A blank side is a miss and nothing happens. This black symbol with a dice-colored background would count as a hit. And this inverted symbol with a black background and a dice-colored explosion would be a surging hit, which would not only count as a hit, but would allow that die to be re-rolled. In our example, the surface units, both the attacker and defending units, will roll their attacks simultaneously. In this example, the green player has rolled 1 hit, where the rebel force has a defense of 1. This would be enough to defeat the rebel unit. The rebel unit rolled no hits, so the green units are unaffected. Whenever a player wins a battle, whether against rebel forces or other players, they get to place one of these battle victory tokens, starting from the left and moving right, into the territory where they won the battle. Not only will winning that battle provide 1 victory point at the end of the game, but whenever you reveal this symbol On your resource tracker of the officer with the green plus sign, you're able to gain an officer to your faction. We'll cover officers in more detail later in the video. We'll do another example to show more steps to the battle round. In this example, there are air units present. So first we'll look into these purple boxes to see what the air attacks are of each air unit. In this example, the bomber on the attacker side can roll 1 white die against the fighter on the defending side, which has an air attack of 2 white die. In our example, the fighter rolled 2 hits to the bomber's 0. This bomber only has a defense of 1, so that's more than enough to destroy the bomber. Moving into step 2, our air unit has a chance to strafe the surface units. Looking at our fighter, it has a surface attack of 1 white. This was a miss, so the surface units on the attacking side take no damage. And on our next step, our surface units will attack each other. On this side, our tanks have 2 orange dice. That makes a total of 4 orange dice for these tanks to roll. On the defending side, we have 1 tank and 2 infantry. On the attacking side, they rolled a surging hit, which counts as a hit as well as the opportunity to re-roll the dice for an additional hit potentially. And that's a miss. So the attacking side rolled 1 hit, while the defending side rolled 2 hits. Whoever owns the unit gets to decide how to distribute the hits amongst their units. So for example, the attacker could choose to split these hits and assign 1 to each unit, and our defending side do 1 to their tank. The last step of the combat will be for the surface units to be able to fire on the air units. So we'll do 2 white dice, 1 for each tank. And these are the tanks rolling an attack against the opponent's fighter. That's a surging hit again, so that counts as 1 hit plus a reroll. So 1 hit, but that is all that's needed to destroy this fighter. There's no victory in the combat yet because both sides still have surface units present, but starting with the attacker and then going to the defender, each player has the choice whether or not to retreat. For our example, we'll say that the attacker is going to retreat. So continuing our example, the green units are going to retreat. You do have the option of doing a partial retreat, so 1 tank could retreat and 1 could keep on fighting. But for this example, we're going to retreat both tanks. Retreating units do not have to spend any fuel to move, but they can only move according to their move statistic. So in this example, the tank only has a move value of 1, so these tanks could only relocate to an adjacent territory. Units must end their retreat in a territory controlled by that player. So these tanks could not retreat into the Emerald Lakes because the player doesn't control that territory. They also can't retreat into Zion because this is a territory that the player does not control, and this would also initiate a battle. Units will go ahead and retreat into Alverton, which is a territory they control. It's important to know that retreating units also cannot initiate any new battles, and they cannot join any pending battles. Any retreating units with capacity are able to carry other units during their retreat. The final step of the Mobilize strategy card after all battles are completed is to explore any territories. Any territories with an Explore token and a land unit present will be explored by right-clicking the token and selecting to explore land. You'll go ahead and flip over the exploration token and resolve the effect of the exploration. For example, the found lot effect says to place an additional factory lot token in the territory. You can grab that from the supply. This 1 additional lot token means that an additional factory can be placed into this territory once it's colonized. And we'll go ahead and explore the second territory. Right-click the token, left-click Explore Land. It says Corrected Census, place a +1 population token in the territory. You can use 9 on the number pad to return those. Again, we'll go to the supply, find the +1 population token, And we'll add that to the territory. So now Alverton has a population of 2. An exception to exploration are these sea territories. Sea territories have this blue and gold compass icon on them. Sea territories are not explored by land units. Instead, when a sea unit, like a battleship or carrier, ends their turn in a territory that has the sea icon, a sea territory, you'll go ahead and right-click the Explore token and instead click on Explore Sea to draw a sea exploration card. For example, this one, Uncharted Island, you'd place the Uncharted Island territory with a land exploration token on it. And then we'd return the Explore token, which would now require a land unit to be present to explore this island. The next strategy card we're going to look at is the Colonize strategy card. This card is important in helping you expand your faction. The first step is to place colonies in territories you control, and there's 3 requirements to place a colony listed here at the top of the screen. With our green player, we'll start out looking at the map and see that there's currently 2 different territories that the green player controls. That means that they have a land unit present in the territory. The next thing you'll need to look at territory type to see if it's a territory that's colonizable. The territory type in Devonshire is represented here with this agricultural territory symbol, and Alverton is going to be an industrial territory. And there's a table on the top right that's going to list each of the different territory types. The other thing that tells you that this territory can be colonized is going to be that it has a population number. The last requirement to place a colony is that that colony would need to be unlocked on your resource tracker. A colony is unlocked when the food factory directly above it has been placed out on the map. So for example, this green player has a colony unlocked here that's directly below this first food factory that's been built, but their next colony is still locked because this food factory directly above it has not been built yet. So let's go ahead and drop that here into Alverton. The next thing the Colonize card will allow you to do is to either place a base in the territory you've colonized or to upgrade a base to an advanced base. So for example, the green player could either place a base here into this colonized territory in Alverton. Bases and advanced bases allow you to place units that you produce directly into those territories. The other option would be to replace their base in their home capital territory with one of these advanced bases. Placing an advanced base awards a benefit depending on which advanced base you build. For example, if you were to place this trade center, you'd be able to move 1 materials factory and 1 fuel factory over to the trade center spot of your resource tracker. This would make it so you produce 1 extra materials and fuel on your turn. The next base, the Citadel, would award you 1 officer, which we'll cover more later. Building that would allow you to draw 3 tactics cards and keep all 3, and we'll cover tactics cards more later as well. And lastly, upgrading to the treasury would allow you to clear all of your bombs. In our example, we'll go ahead and have the green player upgrade their base to the trade post. Go ahead and place the trade center here, and we return the base to the resource tracker. The final step of the Colonize strategy card is to draw a mission that can be done from this purple deck by the research row. Each mission presents the player opportunities to score points by completing certain challenges. If any player has scored 5 missions, the game will end at the end of that current player's turn. And each mission card will have a similar structure. First is the title of the card. Then in italics, it will list the timing window of when that mission can be scored. And lastly, it will list the conditions that have to be met for someone to score the mission. So for example, to score this largest military mission, on your turn, you would have to have the most units on the board with a minimum of 10 units. Liquidate fuel. So on this player's turn, they would need to sell 3 or more fuel factories at a price of 4. If a player were to do that successfully, they would just move that mission card into the completed missions column here to show that they had completed it. Over the course of the game, you will gain officers from card effects or by uncovering this gain an officer symbol on your resource tracker. For example, the green player would gain an officer for this first battle victory. Each faction comes with 6 officers, 3 bronze, 2 silver, and 1 gold. When you gain an officer, you'll be able to fill your lowest available rank. So the first rank here is going to be the bronze rank, meaning the green player can gain any of their bronze officers. Once you select an officer, you'll place it in the appropriate slot, and then you'll need to put the bronze officer icon attached to a unit. This officer will now be attached to this green infantry unit. If this green unit is defeated, the officer will be removed from the game. Officers can be placed into higher ranked slots. For example, this bronze general could be placed into the silver or the gold slot, but they can never be placed in lower slots, so the gold officer could only ever be placed in the gold slot. The next card we'll look at is the growth strategy card. This card will allow you to buy additional factories. To buy additional factories, a player would both need the funds to afford the factory and an open lot in a colonized territory to place it. For example, our green player has colonized Alverton, which has 3 available lots for factories. The green player's current colonized population is at 5, which means they could take out 3 more bonds to be able to spend on factories. Looking at the current factory prices, a materials factory will cost 2 and a fuel factory will cost 1. So with our 3 bonds, we'll buy 1 fuel factory and 1 materials factory to be placed on these lots in Alverton. After you buy or sell factories, you'll re-roll the price dice of whatever commodities you bought or sold. So for our green player, we'll need to re-roll the materials price dice and the fuel commodity price dice. Our new price of materials is 2, so that didn't change, and our fuel price is increased from 1 to 2. For the last step of the growth strategy card, you will draw tactics cards. You can draw 1 tactics card for each food you have. Just like with materials and fuel, you can buy additional food. For example, our green player can spend these 4 credits to buy 1 food because the food price is currently 4. So we'll go ahead and spend those 4 credits. That means that the green player can draw a total of 2 tactics cards. 1 food came from their food factory. The second one we just purchased from the market. It's important to note that when you buy factories or sell factories, you will re-roll the price dice, but when you just buy the commodities, the price stays the same. You can draw a tactics card using the 8 key on the number pad, so we'll get to draw 2 tactics cards, but it's important to note that you can only keep 1 of the tactics cards that you draw. So the more food you buy, the more cards you'll get to look at, but you only keep 1 of them. This is a good time to cover tactics cards. Each tactics card will have a name at the top. Then in italics, it will tell the timing window when you can play the card. And then the last section of text will explain what the card does. In our example, the green player is going to go ahead and keep this Revive Tactics card. This will allow them to restore their officer's defense after it's depleted to 0, so their officer won't be removed from the game and can keep fighting. To return this Exposed Weakness card, we'll go ahead and just press 9 on the number pad. If you press 1 on the number row, you'll draw that Tactics card into your hand. And that's the end of the Growth Strategy card. The next card we'll look at is the Stabilize Strategy card. This one works a lot like the Growth Strategy card, but it allows you to sell factories instead of buying them. So for our example, we'll go ahead and sell this fuel and materials factory that the green player built previously. To sell the factories, you just go ahead and return them to your resource tracker, and then you gain credits equal to the current commodity price for each factory sold. So we get 2 credits for the materials factory and another 2 credits for the fuel factory, since both are currently priced at 2. Just like with the buying factories, we'll go ahead and re-roll the commodity price dice to reset the prices on each of those. Looks like now the materials price is at 3 and the fuel is at 4. It's important to note that these initial 3 factories, your materials, fuel, and food factories surrounded by this capital border can never be sold. Those need to always remain in your capital territory. The next thing we'll talk about is the insider trading token, which starts the game with the last player. This would allow you to get more money for factories you sell or spend less when you buy factories. This would allow you, when you sell factories of one type, to receive 4 credits per factory. So in this example, the green player could have either sold the materials factory or that fuel factory at a price of 4 instead of 2. Similarly, when buying factories, all the factories of one type would only cost 1 credit. The factory price dice is still re-rolled after any purchases or sales of factories, and then that token would pass counterclockwise. The last step of the Stabilize strategy card allows you to select an R&D project from the R&D row. There are 3 different types of projects: technologies, which would be the black background cards here on the left; unit upgrades, which would be these next 2 cards; and lastly, new strategy cards. The technologies can allow continuous benefits or benefits that occur when you exhaust the card. For example, with mobile mechanics, if you were to exhaust this card, it would restore all the units in one territory to full defense. Optimal manufacturing would be a continuous benefit that would allow you to reduce the cost of units you produce by 1 material. Unit upgrades like armored and heavy machine gun would need to be attached to a specific unit type, and each unit can only have 1 upgrade. Along the top of each card, there's some icons that list the type of units this upgrade can be attached to. And then along the left side, we can see the benefit. So the armored benefit would add +1 defense to any of the unit types listed along the top. Heavy machine gun works the same way, but anytime there's a number with an asterisk, this number would replace the current unit statistic instead of increasing it. For example, if green were to look into getting one of these unit upgrades for their infantry, adding armor to their infantry unit would move their defense to 2, while adding the heavy machine gun to their infantry would change their surface attack to 1 orange. The last type of R&D project would be a new strategy card. This would go directly into your hand and would play just like any other strategy card. This soul card would allow you to produce units and then also move units on the same turn. For the green player's turn, we'll go ahead and select the unit upgrade and attach it to their infantry, and place the upgrade card directly below the unit card. That means that we can go to all of our infantry units and increase their current defense to 2. When a player plays a strategy card on their turn, they place that card on top of their discard pile. The mirror card will allow you to perform the action of a strategy card on top of another player's discard pile. For example, if the blue player had the recruitment card on top of their discard pile, when the green player plays mirror, be able to perform the actions of the recruitment strategy card as their turn. The last card we'll look at is the Upkeep strategy card. This card allows you to refresh your components. The first step of this card would be to collect tax. When you collect tax, you gain credits equal to your colonized population. Looking at our green player, the total colonized population is going to be 5. So the green player would receive 5 credits in tax. The second step of the Upkeep card would be to pay the Upkeep costs listed on any strategy cards that you have not played and still have in your hand. The green player played all strategy cards, so they do not have any Upkeep costs. But if you were to look on the bottom of each strategy card, you can see an Upkeep listed anywhere from 1 to 2 credits. If this card was still in the green player's hand, they would have to pay 2 credits at this time in Upkeep costs for the recruitment card. If a player can't afford to pay the Upkeep costs for the strategy card still in their hand, then they cannot play the Upkeep card. You can use the credits you just obtained from tax in step 1 to pay your Upkeep cost in step 2. The third step of Upkeep would allow you to refresh all of your exhausted cards. For example, this mobile mechanics technology is a technology that you would exhaust to restore all units in one territory to full defense. When you play the Upkeep card on step 3, you'd be able to refresh this technology to use again in the future. The final step of the Upkeep card would be to return all of your strategy cards to your hand. Now we'll do a quick example of the end of game scoring. So we'll say on this last turn, the green player won their 6th battle, triggering the end game at the end of the turn. We'll go ahead and go through and add up all their victory points. Starting with Zion control, looks like they controlled Zion enough territories to score 3 victory points. Those in. Next, battle victories, they did enough to have 5 victory points there. And also, if you remember, we had the ambition that allows us to double the battle victory score, so that'll be an additional 5 points there. For Colonize place, it looks like they had 3 points there. And missions are going to be a total of 6 more points, 2 per mission with 3 missions. Take the score up to 22. There is 1 bond outstanding, so that's going to be minus 1 point there. And also, let's look at the weakness here. The weakness of Loner says lose 3 victory points for every officer slot that does not have an active officer. Looks like that gold officer slot is not filled, so that'd be minus 3 more points at the final score of 18. So that's the end of the how to play video. I hope you have a great time playing this game. Again, if you have any feedback, please send that to 4085gamery@gmail.com.